The bolt would not cooperate. Owen Reyes had been lying on his back inside a crawl space for the better part of 2 hours, arm shoved into a wall panel, fingers searching for a coolant fitting that had no business being this deep inside a junction box. The station hummed around him. Pipes groaned. Somewhere far above, in the polished diplomatic halls of Station Drea 7, important people in clean uniforms were greeting even more important aliens with smiles and handshakes and freshly pressed agreements. Down here, Owen had grease on his chin and a bruised knuckle. He was fine with that. He had always been fine with that. Station Drea 7 was a crossroads. 3 trade routes met at its center, and the station had grown around that fact for 200 years, adding ring after ring until it looked less like something built and more like something that had simply accumulated. Every species with a ship and a reason passed through here eventually. Owen had been staff for 4 years, long enough to stop noticing the 4-armed cargo loaders, the bioluminescent jellyfish diplomats floating in their translation tanks, the low mechanical groan of docking clamps locking around ships the size of city blocks. He noticed the dragons, though. Everyone noticed the dragons. They had arrived that morning, a Drachii diplomatic delegation, 12 strong, led by a matriarch named Veth. Owen had not seen them in person yet, but the whole station had felt the shift. Conversations got quieter. Staff walked faster. Counselor Rhyme had sent 3 separate memos before noon reminding all non-essential personnel to avoid the diplomatic corridors, avoid eye contact, and under no circumstances initiate contact with any member of the delegation. Owen had read the memos. He had then gone back to his coolant pipe. He finally got the bolt free. It pinged off the wall and disappeared into the dark somewhere behind him. He decided it was not important and pulled himself out of the crawl space feet first, sitting up on the corridor floor with a long exhale. The corridor was quiet. Sublevel 4 rarely had foot traffic at this hour, maintenance staff, the occasional cargo bot, nobody else. Then something skidded across the floor and stopped against his boot. Owen looked down. It was small, roughly the size of his fist. It looked like a bird or something that had decided to be a bird, made of pale jointed metal with wings that were clearly meant to move. Along its spine, a row of tiny crystals sat dark and lifeless. One wing was bent at a wrong angle. A thin crack ran along its chest panel, and from that crack, a faint bioluminescent glow leaked out and then faded, like a candle going out. Owen picked it up carefully. He looked up. A dragon child stood at the far end of the corridor. She was small for a dragon, which still meant she came up to his shoulder. Her scales were pale gold, not yet darkened to the deep amber of an adult. Her wings were folded tight against her back in the way young creatures fold things when they are trying to make themselves smaller. Her eyes were enormous and yellow-green, and they were wet. She was staring at the toy in his hands. Owen did not move. He had learned a long time ago, in a life before space stations and coolant pipes, that when a frightened creature looked at you, the worst thing you could do was move fast. He stayed very still. The dragon child took 1 step forward, then stopped. Owen looked at the toy again. The crack in the chest panel was clean stress fracture, probably from the fall. The crystal along the spine had not shattered, just come loose from its housing. The bent wing was a hinge problem. He could see the hinge from here. It was a simple pivot mechanism, not so different from a dozen things he fixed every week. He turned it over in his hands slowly, not because he was performing calm, but because he genuinely wanted to understand the thing before he touched anything important. The bioluminescent glow pulsed once more from the crack, weak, fatting, and then went dark for good. The dragon child made a sound. It was not a roar. It was not even close to a roar. It was small and low, and it had no translation because some sounds do not need one. Owen had heard that sound before from things much smaller than a young dragon, and it landed in his chest the same way it always did. He looked at her. She looked at him. He thought about the 3 memos from Counselor Rhyme. He thought about avoid eye contact and do not initiate contact and non-essential personnel. He thought about the 12 dragons in the diplomatic halls above them and the treaty that the whole station had spent 6 months preparing for. He set those thoughts aside. He held the toy up slightly so she could see it clearly in his hands, and he said in a quiet and level voice, "I can fix this." She did not understand the words. The translator chip in his collar would need a moment to process, and she was too young to have a full receiver anyway. But she understood the tone, the same way anything young understands a tone that is not a threat, not a command, but simply an offer. She did not run. Owen unclipped his repair kit from his belt, set it on the floor between them, and got to work. The crystal was the problem. Owen could see that within the first 2 minutes. The bird's wing he could fix with a flat tool and patience. The hinge pin had simply jumped its groove, probably from the same impact that cracked the chest panel. That was easy. The chest panel itself he could close with a microclamp from his kit, the kind he used for sealing hairline fractures in conduit housing. Not a permanent fix, but solid enough. The crystal was something else. It sat in a cradle inside the chest cavity, a small thing, pale blue, shaped like a tapered cylinder. Along its surface ran tiny channels, too fine to be mechanical, more like something grown than carved. He had seen bioluminescent tech before, mostly in the jellyfish diplomat tanks and the older Luran navigation panels, but he had never worked on it directly. He did not know what powered it. He did not know what it was supposed to do beyond make the bird glow, and presumably, move in ways it was no longer moving. What he did know was that it had come loose from its cradle. The cradle had 4 contact points, small raised nodes that the crystal was supposed to rest against. One of the nodes had bent slightly inward on impact, which meant the crystal was no longer making full contact. The glow had died because the connection had died. Owen exhaled slowly through his nose. Behind him, Duno's voice came around the corner first. "Owen, I've been looking for you for 20 minutes. Rhyme wants the sub-4 junction report by." Duno stopped. Owen heard the footsteps halt. Then very quietly, "Owen, that is a dragon child." "I noticed," Owen said without looking up. "Her mother will set you on fire." "Her mother isn't here." "Her mother will find out and then set you on fire later, which is somehow worse." Owen did not answer. He was using the tip of a fine probe to very carefully ease the bent contact node back into position. His hands were steady. They had always been steady. It was the one thing he had that no amount of bad luck or long shifts had ever taken from him. The dragon child had not moved from her spot. She was sitting now, legs folded, watching him work with the kind of absolute focus that only children and predators could sustain. Every time Owen's hands moved, her eyes moved with them. When he paused to reach into his kit for a different tool, she leaned forward by about 2 centimeters. Duno had not left. "3 people walked past her before you got here," Duno said, his voice lower now. "I saw it on the corridor feed when I was looking for you. 3 station staff. They all saw her. They all kept walking." Owen looked up briefly. The dragon child blinked. "I know," Owen said. "I'm not judging them," Duno said. "I'm just saying." "I know," Owen said again. He turned his attention back to the crystal cradle. The node was close, almost back in position. He switched tools, choosing something thinner and pressed with care that was just on the edge of what his fingers could manage. The node moved a fraction more, then a fraction more. He set the crystal back into the cradle. Nothing happened. Owen stared at it. He checked the contact points visually, they looked right. He checked the chest panel connection, that was fine. He looked at the crystal itself and turned it slowly in the light, and that was when he saw it. One end of the crystal was slightly darker than the other. Not damaged, oriented wrong. It had been put back and upside down when he had moved it. He flipped it. The crystal lit up. It was not a big light. It was soft and blue-white, and it pulsed once, twice, then settled into a steady, gentle glow that moved through the metal bird's body like something breathing. The wing hinge, which he had already reset, gave a small click. Then the wing moved, a slow, careful flap, then another, finding its rhythm. The bird chirped. It was a small sound, thin and clear, like a real bird heard from the other side of a wall. It chirped again, wings moving in a slow, steady rhythm, crystals glowing warm along its spine. Owen held it out. The dragon child went completely still. For 3 full seconds she did not breathe, did not blink, did not move a single scale. Then she crossed the distance between them in 2 quick steps and took the bird from his hands with both clawed hands pressed together, the way someone holds water they are afraid to spill. She looked at the bird, she looked at Owen. Owen picked up his tools and began putting them back in his kit, one by one, in their correct slots. From the corridor entrance, Duno let out a long, unsteady breath. "Okay," he said. "Okay, that was okay. Can we please leave now before her mother?" The temperature dropped. Not by a lot, not enough to see your breath, just enough to feel it, a shift in the air, the kind of cold that is not the station ventilation but something else entirely. Owen stopped putting tools away. Duno made a very small sound. Heavy footsteps rounded the corner at the far end of the corridor, and Veth, matriarch of the Drachii delegation, came into view. Veth was not what Owen had imagined. He had imagined something like the old pictures, vast wings spread wide, fire at the edges of an open mouth, the kind of creature that filled a space by existing in it. And she did fill the corridor. She was taller than any alien he had stood near, deep amber scales that caught the corridor lights and held them like metal, eyes the color of heated copper. Her wings were folded so tightly against her back that they looked like armor. She wore no uniform. She did not need one. What Owen had not imagined was how still she was. She did not charge. She did not roar. She came around the corner and she stopped, and the stopping was worse than anything loud would have been, because it meant she was in control and she was deciding. Her eyes went to Sora first. Sora was clutching the bird to her chest with both hands, wings half raised the way young ones raised them when they were startled. She made a sound in Drachii, short, quick, and Veth's expression did not change, but something in her posture shifted, so slightly that Owen almost missed it. The tight coil of something dangerous became, for just a moment, something else. Then her eyes moved to Owen. He did not look away. Not out of bravery, it was more that looking away felt dishonest, and he had never been comfortable with dishonesty, even the kind that might save him from getting incinerated in a maintenance corridor. Behind him, Duno had gone so quiet Owen could not even hear him breathe. Veth looked at Owen for a long moment, then her gaze dropped to his hands. He was still holding his repair kit, screwdriver in one hand, fine probe in the other. His knuckles were greasy, and there was a smear of coolant on his left sleeve that had been there since before any of this started. She looked at the tools. She looked at Sora, who was now holding the glowing bird out toward her mother, wings fully settled, saying something in rapid and excited Drachii. The translator in Owen's collar struggled with the speed and the age register but caught fragments, fixed it, and the man and it sings again. Veth said nothing. The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere in the pipes above, something clicked and hissed in the normal way of station infrastructure. Otherwise, nothing moved. Owen put the screwdriver back in his kit. Slowly. He put the probe in beside it and closed the kit with a soft click and stood up to his full height, which was not impressive by any measure, certainly not compared to what was standing across from him. He held the repair kit at his side. He thought about saying something. He thought about explaining himself, the toy, the crack, the crystal, the node. He thought about citing the memos, about saying he had not meant any harm, about reassuring her that he had not touched her daughter except to hand back the repaired bird. He said none of it. Instead, he looked at Sora, who was still holding the bird out toward her mother with an expression that needed no translation at all, and he felt what he always felt when a fix worked, a simple and clean satisfaction. The bird was working. The child was not crying anymore. That was the whole thing from start to finish. He took one step to the side, putting himself slightly out of the direct line between Veth and Sora, and then he stayed still. Footsteps came from behind him, fast ones. Counselor Rhyme arrived at the corridor entrance with 2 station security officers and the look of a person who had not slept in 3 days and had just been told something that made it worse. He took in the scene: Veth, Owen, Sora, the glowing bird. Duno flattened against the wall and all the color left his face in one go. "Technician Rays," Rhyme said, in a voice that was trying very hard to be level. "Please step back." Owen did not move, not because he was being difficult, but because stepping back now felt like saying the last few minutes had been a mistake, and he did not believe that. Veth's eyes moved to Rhyme, then back to Owen. Sora pressed herself against her mother's side. Veth's wing, just the very edge of it, unfolded slightly and came down around the child's shoulders, not looking at her, still watching Owen. Then she spoke, one sentence in Drachii. The translator took 3 seconds. It came out as, "What is your name?" Not a question, a demand for a fact. "Owen Rays," he said. "Station technician, sublevels 2 through 5. Veth said nothing further. She looked at him for 2 more seconds, the kind of look that did not feel like a look but more like something being measured. And then she turned, Sora tucked against her side, and walked back the way she had come. The corridor felt larger after she left. Rhyme let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped for a week. The security officers looked at each other. Duno peeled himself off the wall and walked over to Owen, and put both hands on his shoulders and stared at him. "I cannot believe," Duno said very quietly and with great feeling, "that you are still alive." Owen looked down at his repair kit. "The pipe," he said. "I still need to finish the pipe." Owen assumed he was in trouble. That was his first thought when Counselor Rhyme's message came through the next morning, short, official, no extra words. "Report to Diplomatic Chamber 3 at 9th hour. Bring your station ID." He read it twice. He considered asking Duno what it meant, but Duno had spent the previous evening telling the story to everyone in the staff quarters, so Duno's read on the situation was not going to be calm or useful. Owen ate his meal, changed into a clean uniform, and went. Chamber 3 was in the upper rings, where the corridors had actual lighting that did not flicker, and the floor panels were not held down with mismatched bolts. Rhyme was waiting outside the door with the expression of a man attending something he did not fully understand and was not sure he would survive. "She requested this meeting," Rhyme said very quietly as Owen approached. "I want to be clear, this came from her side. You are not in disciplinary proceedings. You are not," he paused. "Just answer her questions honestly and do not make any sudden movements." "I wasn't planning on it," Owen said. Inside, the chamber was simple. A long table, 2 seats, a window that looked out at the slow turning of the station's outer ring against open space. Veth was already there. She was alone, which surprised him. He had expected guards or staff or the kind of formality that came with rank. She was sitting very still in a seat that had clearly been adjusted to fit something much larger than it was built for, and she watched him come in with those copper-colored eyes and said nothing until he sat down. Then she said, "Why did you stop?" Owen had thought about this on the walk over. Not to prepare an answer, he was not good at preparing answers. He had thought about it because it was a fair question, and he wanted to understand his own answer before he gave it. "Because she was crying," he said. Veth's expression did not change. "There were others before you. They did not stop." "I know. You knew the delegation was here. You knew the station protocols." "Yes." "Then why did the protocols not apply to you?" Owen considered this for a moment. Outside the window, a cargo hauler drifted past in slow silence. running lights blinking in the dark. "They did apply," he said. "The protocols are about not causing a diplomatic incident. I thought walking past a crying child was more likely to cause a problem than stopping." Veth was quiet. "Also," Owen said, because honesty tended to come out of him in pieces rather than all at once, "I fix things. That is what I do all day. I saw something broken and I had the tools to fix it. That part was not complicated." "You did not know what the object was." "I knew it was broken and that it mattered to her. That was enough to start." Veth leaned back slightly. The movement was slow and measured in the way all her movements were, like someone who had learned long ago that their size made fast motion seem threatening and had adjusted for it. "My people have observed your species for 40 years, she said. "Since first contact, we have read your histories, your science, your conflicts. We find humans," she paused, in the way someone pauses when they are choosing a word carefully, not because they do not know the right one but because they are deciding whether to say it plainly. "Difficult to understand." "That's fair," Owen said. "You act before you think. You form attachments quickly and without apparent strategy. You treat strangers as though they have already earned your care. These are not logical behaviors." "No," Owen agreed. "And yet they produce results that logic by itself does not seem to reach." She said this as though it frustrated her slightly, as though she had been sitting with this observation for some time and it had not gotten more comfortable. "3 of my staff passed that corridor before you arrived. They were each senior members of this delegation, experienced, rational. They assessed the situation correctly, that engaging with a matriarch's child without permission was a risk not worth taking. Their reasoning was sound." Owen nodded slowly. "And Sora sat alone and cried for 11 minutes, Veth said, while correct reasoning walked past her." The chamber was quiet. Owen did not feel the need to fill the quiet. He waited. "She has had that bird since she was newly hatched," Veth said. "It was made by her father. He is no longer living." She said this the way a person says a fact they have made peace with without drama, but with a weight underneath it that did not go anywhere. "When I heard it had broken, before I knew you had repaired it, I thought—" She stopped. "It does not matter what I thought." "It matters to me," Owen said quietly. She looked at him. For a long moment she just looked at him, the way she had looked at him in the corridor the day before, measuring something. Then she said, "Do you know what the Drachii say about instinct in your species?" "No." "We call it reckless," she said. "We have always called it reckless." She paused. "Yesterday I found myself uncertain whether that word is correct." Owen said nothing. Veth rose from her seat. The meeting was over. He could feel it the way you feel the end of a shift, not announced but understood. She moved toward the door and stopped beside it, not looking at him, looking at the wall. "The bird sings well," she said. "You have capable hands." Owen stood. "Thank you." She left. He stood in the empty chamber for a moment, looking out at the slow dark of space, and then he went back to work. By midday, everyone on the station knew. Not the details, not Veth's words or the 11 minutes or the thing about Sora's father. Just the broad shape of it. The human technician on Sub-4 had repaired a dragon child's toy and then been privately summoned by the matriarch herself and had apparently walked out of that meeting alive, and in the same number of pieces he had walked in with. Duno had told 6 people. Those 6 had each told 5. Station gossip moved fast because station life was often slow, and this was the most interesting thing to happen on Drea 7 in months. Owen found out how far it had spread when the senior cargo supervisor on Level 2, a woman he had spoken to maybe 4 times in 4 years, stopped him in the junction corridor and nodded at him with what could only be described as respect. He did not know what to do with that, so he nodded back and kept walking. He was on his way to replace a corroded bracket in Junction 7 when he heard the footsteps behind him. Small ones, uneven, with the particular gait of something young that had not yet fully sorted out the relationship between its legs and its intentions. He did not stop walking, but he slowed. Sara fell into step beside him. She was holding the bird. It was glowing softly, wings folded at rest. She was not looking at him. She was looking ahead in the careful way of someone who was absolutely not following him on purpose and was simply happening to walk in the same direction at the same pace. Owen looked down at her, then forward again. He kept walking. She kept walking beside him. When he reached Junction 7 and stopped to open the panel, she sat down cross-legged on the floor about a meter to his left, the bird in her lap, and watched. He unclipped his kit and started on the bracket. He did not say anything, because he was not sure how much common tongue she had, and because words were not really the point. For a while it was just the sound of his tools and the normal breath of the station. Then Owen reached into his kit and found, between a packet of sealant tape and a spare hinge pin, an old connector bolt he had been carrying for weeks, because it was slightly the wrong size for anything, but he kept thinking it might be useful. He pulled it out and set it on the floor between them. Sara looked at it. She picked it up with 2 careful claws and turned it over, examined it with the complete seriousness of a young creature encountering an object for the first time. She held it up to the corridor light. She pressed the threading against her palm. She looked at Owen, then back at the bolt. She held it out to him. He took it with the same gravity she had offered it with. She nodded once, satisfied, and went back to watching him work. Neither of them saw Veth. She had followed at a distance, not hiding, but not announcing herself either. She stood at the junction corridor entrance and watched. She had told herself she was conducting a reasonable check on her daughter's whereabouts, which was true enough that she did not examine it further. What she watched was this: a human doing his work while a young dragon sat nearby watching, and neither of them requiring anything from the other. Sora's wings were loose, relaxed. She was making the small, low sound she made when she was comfortable, the sound she had not made once since her father died, not until yesterday when she had come back to the rooms with the repaired bird glowing in her claws. Veth watched Owen hand Sara a small tool to hold, not because he needed it held, but because she was clearly curious about it and it gave her something to do. Sara took it with both hands and held it with focus. Owen kept working. The Drachii had a word for the way a strong creature behaved around a small one. It was not a common word. It described a specific quality, the restraint of power in the presence of something that did not need power shown at it. Soldiers used it. Teachers used it. It was considered a form of discipline. Veth had not expected to need that word when thinking about a human maintenance worker. She stood in the corridor for a long time, long enough to see Owen finish the bracket, check it twice, and begin packing his kit. Long enough to see Sara hand back the tool with both hands, formal as a ceremony, and Owen receive it the same way. Then Sara did something that made Veth go still. She picked up the connector bolt Owen had put on the floor between them, the one he had set out like an offering or a greeting or something without a clean name, and held it out to him. A trade, the way Drachii children offered things. The way Sara had learned from her father that when someone gave you something, you gave something back. Not the same thing, not equal in value, just back, because that was what you did. Owen looked at the bolt. He looked at Sara. He took the bolt and held it carefully and said one word. Deal. Sara's wings came up slightly at the edges. Not a display, just warmth expressed the only way she had. Veth turned and walked back toward the diplomatic wing. She did not have a word, in Drachii or in common tongue, for what she was feeling, but she thought that perhaps reckless had never been the right word at all. Perhaps the right word was something her people had simply never needed, because they had never encountered a species that did this, that stopped without being asked, that fixed without being paid, that sat beside a grieving child with nothing to offer but presence and a small metal bolt. She thought perhaps the Dracii language had a gap in it. And she thought, for the first time in this visit, that it might be worth filling. The treaty signing was set for the 14th hour. Owen watched it on a monitor in the Sub-3 maintenance hub, a small screen mounted to the wall beside the coolant gauge panel, the kind of screen that usually showed pressure readings and junction diagnostics. He had switched it to the station's live feed without thinking much about it, and now he stood with a thermos of cooling tea in one hand and watched the great ceremonial hall fill up with delegations from 9 species. Duno leaned on the wall beside him. "You're not eating," Duno said. "Not hungry. You worked 8 hours today." "I know." On the screen, the hall looked as it always looked for these things, polished, arranged, carefully lit so that every species' visual range was covered. The delegation sat in curved rows facing a central platform. Flags, if you could call the various light arrays and woven banners flags. Representatives who had spent months on the language and protocol of this moment now sitting very still, radiating the specific tension of people trying not to show that they were tense. The Dracii delegation was at the far left. 12 of them, amber and dark gold under the hall lights, wings folded. Sara was not there, too young for the formal session. Owen had not thought he would look for her, but he had. Counselor Rhyme opened the proceedings. Owen watched him read from prepared remarks about cooperation and mutual benefit, and the long work of building trust across the distances between worlds. The words were good words. They had been written carefully by people who understood what was at stake. Owen did not disagree with any of them. He just watched the shapes that the ceremony made and thought about how much machinery existed in these rooms, and how none of it was the kind he knew how to fix. The signings proceeded in order of delegation seniority. Name by name, one at a time, each representative coming forward to add their mark to the agreement. It was slow in the way important things are slow, the deliberate pace of something being made permanent. Veth was last. She came forward and the hall was quieter for it, the way rooms went quiet around her. She stood at the platform and she did not reach for the signing instrument immediately. She turned to face the hall. On the monitor, Counselor Rhyme's expression shifted to the carefully neutral face of a man who had not been told this was going to happen. Veth spoke in Dracii. The hall translation system ran half a second behind, rendering her voice into common tongue and 11 other languages simultaneously. She said, "Before I sign, I will observe a tradition of my people." She said, "The Dracii practice of nomming is not given lightly and is not given often. It is given when someone has demonstrated worth, not through power or rank or deliberate act, but through the quality of how they move through the world when no one is watching and nothing is required of them." The hall was absolutely still. She said, "It has not been given to a non-Dracii in my lifetime." She paused. The translator paused with her. Then she said, "Owen Rays, Station Technician Drea 7, Sublevels 2 through 5. Duno turned slowly toward Owen. On the monitor, several delegation members exchanged looks. Rhyme had gone pale. In the maintenance hub, Owen had stopped breathing somewhere around the words "my lifetime" and had not started again. Veth continued, "In the language of my people, those who do necessary work that others pass by are called Drevkal. It means—" She paused again, and for just a moment Owen thought she was choosing words. "Small hands, large heart. It is not an insult. It is the name we give those who understand that the smallest repair can be the most important one." She turned back to the platform. She signed. The hall exhaled as one. In Sub-3, Duno put both hands on top of his head and stared at the monitor. "Owen," he said. Owen said nothing. "Owen," she just, "in the official treaty record. That is going to be in the official record of a 9-species treaty. Your name is going to be Owen." Owen was holding the thermos very carefully, the way you hold something when your hands need something to do. On the screen, The ceremony concluded in the way ceremonies concluded, with movement and sound and the general release of a long-held breath. The Drachii delegation began to rise. Veth turned from the platform and walked toward the exit. The camera angle shifted as she left the hall. For 3 seconds, the corridor feed caught her passing the junction entrance to Sub-3. She did not stop. She did not look toward the monitor or the maintenance hub or anything that indicated she knew she was observed. But she inclined her head. Just slightly. 1 degree, perhaps less. The way you might acknowledge something that did not need to be said aloud because it had already been said in every way that mattered. Then she was gone. Owen stood in the maintenance hub with a cooling thermos and a slightly wrong-sized bolt in his jacket pocket, and said nothing for a long time. He had not saved anything large. He had not fought or spoken or stood in front of something dangerous for the good of anyone. He had fixed a broken toy in a corridor because a child was crying and he had the tools and no one else had stopped. He had done the small thing. And somewhere in the official record of a 9-species treaty, in the formal language of an ancient and proud people who did not give this to outsiders, his name was written down. Duno broke the silence because Duno always did. "I'm telling everyone," he said. "You already told everyone," Owen said. "I'm telling them again." Owen looked at the monitor, now back to showing pressure readings and junction diagnostics. He took a sip of his tea. It was completely cold. He decided it did not matter.